The transition into true adulthood is rarely marked by a clear, well-lit path or a definitive handbook of instructions. Instead, it is a sudden, often disorienting plunge into a chaotic landscape where the rules of formal education no longer apply, and where the safety nets of structured grading systems completely evaporate. In her deeply insightful and transformative guide, What I Wish I Knew When I Was 20, author Tina Seelig, a distinguished professor at Stanford University, dismantles the conventional myths surrounding career paths, risk-taking, and personal achievement. Seelig presents a radical behavioral framework that challenges the deeply entrenched cultural narrative that success is born out of compliance, linear execution, and the avoidance of failure. Through a brilliant synthesis of real-world entrepreneurial case studies and psychological insights, the book acts as an intellectual catalyst, forcing us to view problems not as frustrating barriers, but as rare, incredibly lucrative opportunities for innovation. By re-engineering our relationship with failure, mastering the art of the pivot, and recognizing the invisible value of our own agency, we can completely rewrite the trajectory of our professional and personal lives. To understand why so many highly intelligent, academically successful individuals hit a wall when they enter the real world, we must first isolate the core psychological friction Seelig addresses, the profound difference between a classroom environment and open-ended reality. In a traditional educational setting, problems are neatly packaged, cleanly defined, and specifically designed to have one exact, correct answer that can be uncovered by following a predetermined formula. The student who excels in this ecosystem is the one who masterfully follows directions, colors inside the lines, and minimizes errors. The real world, however, behaves like a completely different ecosystem, one that is deliberately messy, hyper-competitive, and systematically unscripted. Out here, there are no teachers handing out assignments, no clear grading rubrics to measure your progress, and absolutely no single correct answers to the complex challenges of industry, technology, or human relations. When young professionals enter this unmapped territory, their academic conditioning often backfires completely. They sit passively, waiting for someone to give them permission to act, or they freeze in fear because they are terrified of making a mistake that might ruin their pristine record. Seelig forces us to realize that true entrepreneurial success requires us to unlearn this compliance-based mindset. We must develop what she terms an opportunistic lens, a cognitive framework that actively seeks out ambiguity and views gaps in the marketplace as blank canvases waiting for creative destruction. This cognitive shift requires a complete, structural redefinition of what a problem actually is. Most people view problems as painful nuisances, things to be avoided, complained about, or bypassed entirely if at all possible. Seelig flips this perspective entirely on its head, presenting a foundational axiom: the size of the problems you are willing to solve is the exact metric that dictates your value to the world. If you look at the landscape of global industry, the most successful companies and influential leaders are simply those who identified a massive, painful friction point in human life and engineered a scalable mechanism to eliminate it. To demonstrate this, Seelig famously runs an exercise with her Stanford students, handing teams a mere $5 and giving them 2 hours to generate as much financial return as possible. The teams that rely on conventional, linear thinking spend their time analyzing how to get the most out of the $5 itself, usually ending up buying a few cheap supplies to set up a basic car wash or a lemonade stand. The teams that win the challenge, however, completely ignore the $5. They realize that the money is a distracting constraint, a psychological anchor that limits their imagination. Instead, they look at their environment, identify a real problem, and solve it, like booking reservations at popular local restaurants for busy people, or selling their 2-minute presentation slot to a company looking to recruit Stanford students. By bypassing the obvious and focusing entirely on creating value from thin air, these students generate hundreds of dollars in a couple of hours, proving that resourcefulness is vastly more powerful than resources. This brings us directly to the concept of the failure resume, an analytical tool Seelig champions to help individuals overcome their paralyzing fear of making mistakes. In polite society, we are trained to hide our missteps, carefully curating our public personas to showcase an unbroken string of flawless victories and promotions. This creates a highly distorted, toxic illusion that successful people somehow glide from one achievement to the next without ever stumbling. A failure resume shatters this illusion by requiring you to write down your biggest professional, personal, and academic screw-ups, followed immediately by an objective analysis of exactly what you learned from each disaster. When you subject your failures to this level of rigorous scrutiny, you strip them of their emotional shame and transform them into invaluable data points. Failure is not the opposite of success. It is the fundamental, non-negotiable cost of innovation. If you are not failing with some degree of regularity, it is a definitive, statistical sign that you are playing it far too safe, operating well within your current capabilities, and refusing to push the boundaries of what is possible. True growth happens at the very edge of your competence, in the volatile zone where the probability of making a mistake is incredibly high. To navigate this volatile zone successfully, a young professional must learn to reject the dangerous myth of the perfect career path. We are culturally conditioned to believe that we must pick a specific destination in our early 20s and execute a flawless, linear march toward that goal for the next 40 years. This approach is not only incredibly stressful, but it is also completely detached from the reality of a modern, fast-evolving economy where entire industries are created and destroyed in the span of a single decade. Instead of building a rigid, multi-decade master plan, Seelig encourages us to look at life as a series of experiments, pivots, and iterations. Every job, every project, and every side hustle is simply a laboratory where you gather data about your unique strengths, your weaknesses, and the things that genuinely fire up your curiosity. If an experiment fails or a role no longer serves your development, it is not a tragedy. It is simply a signal that it is time to pivot, to take the skills you have accumulated and reapply them to a new, more compelling challenge. The most extraordinary careers are almost never straight lines. They are erratic, fascinating zigzags driven by curiosity, adaptability, and an unyielding willingness to say yes to unexpected opportunities. Saying yes to unexpected opportunities requires us to actively dismantle the internal psychological barriers that prevent us from taking action, specifically the pervasive phenomenon of waiting for permission. Throughout our childhood and formal education, we are constantly reliant on gatekeepers, parents, teachers, coaches, and admissions officers to tell us when we are ready, what we are allowed to do, and when it is our turn to speak. As a result, many adults spend their entire lives sitting on the sidelines of their own careers, waiting for a manager to notice their talent, waiting for a company to offer them a dream role, or waiting for a perfect moment of readiness that will never actually arrive. Seelig seeks to break this spell of institutional helplessness by reminding us that in the real world, nobody is coming to save you, and nobody is going to hand you a crown. If you want to make an impact, you have to grant yourself permission. You have to take the initiative to solve problems before you are asked, to create projects that do not exist yet, and to pitch ideas that might be rejected. When you assume absolute, sovereign agency over your career, you stop being a passive passenger in an organization and become a driver of your own destiny, creating a level of leverage that makes you completely indispensable. This proactive stance must be coupled with a deep, sophisticated mastery of interpersonal dynamics, particularly the underappreciated art of being a team player who builds a high-value network. Many ambitious individuals mistakenly believe that success is a solo sport, a brutal zero-sum game where you must claw your way to the top by outcompeting and outshining everyone around you. This short-sighted perspective completely ignores the fact that the professional world is an incredibly small, highly interconnected web of human relationships. The bridges you burn today will almost certainly be the very bridges you need to cross a decade from now. Seelig emphasizes that true, sustainable professional leverage is built by consistently over-delivering, practicing radical transparency, and actively helping others succeed without expecting any immediate return. When you become known as a person who solves problems, reduces friction, and elevates the performance of everyone in the room, your reputation becomes a powerful, self-sustaining asset that opens doors you didn't even know existed. Ultimately, what I wish I knew when I was 20 is an empowering, paradigm-shifting manifesto that reclaims the true meaning of human potential. It strips away the comforting, protective illusions of structured systems, forcing us to look at our lives not as a series of boxes to be checked, but as a wild, high-stakes game of creative problem-solving. The journey to an extraordinary, impactful life does not require a genetic miracle, an inheritance, or a perfect alignment of external circumstances. It simply requires you to change how you look at the world around you, to train your mind to see the massive possibilities hidden within every frustration, and to embrace the beautiful, messy process of trial and error. By stepping out of the comfort zone of compliance, treating failure as an essential teacher, and stepping into your own sovereign power, you break the chains of mediocrity forever. The next time you find yourself facing a daunting challenge or a confusing crossroads, pause. Remember that you do not need permission to be great, and build the future you actually want to see.